Life as a peasant during medieval times was marked by hard work, limited opportunities, and a challenging existence. Peasants constituted the majority of the population, living in rural areas and toiling in the fields to sustain themselves and their families. Their lives were closely tied to the land, as they worked as agricultural laborers, subject to the demands and obligations imposed by the feudal system. Peasants faced long hours of physical labor, unpredictable harvests, and lived in simple dwellings with limited access to resources. Despite the hardships, peasants formed tight-knit communities, relied on communal support, and found solace in traditions and celebrations. Join Facts First History as we present what life was really like for medieval peasants. Basic hierarchy. During medieval times, society was organized into a hierarchical structure known as the feudal system. This system established a clear social order based on the ownership and control of land, with power and wealth concentrated at the top. At the pinnacle of the social hierarchy were the monarchs, kings, and queens who held ultimate authority over the land and its inhabitants. They were considered divinely ordained and ruled with absolute power. Directly below the monarchs were the nobility, consisting of lords and barons. These aristocrats held vast estates granted to them by the king in exchange for military service and loyalty. They lived in grand castles or manor houses and enjoyed privileges like collecting taxes, dispensing justice, and maintaining their own armies. Below the nobility were the clergy, who held significant power within the church. Bishops, abbots, and priests oversaw religious affairs, administered sacraments, and controlled extensive lands and wealth. The church played a central role in medieval society, exerting influence over both spiritual and secular matters. Next in the hierarchy were the knights, who served as heavily armored mounted warriors. Knights were typically of noble birth and granted knighthood by a lord for their military service. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the peasants, also known as serfs or villeins. They constituted the majority of the population and worked the land as agricultural laborers. They were tied to the manor and owed various obligations to the lord, such as labor services and payments in kind. They lived in small, simple dwellings and had limited rights and freedoms. Peasant diets. The diet of medieval peasants was largely shaped by their limited resources and the availability of food during that time. Peasants relied heavily on agriculture for their sustenance, cultivating crops and raising animals on lands they worked. Their diet primarily consisted of simple, locally produced foods. Bread was a staple in the medieval peasant diet, particularly coarse bread made from grains like rye, barley, or oats. Wheat bread, which was more refined, was consumed by wealthier people. Peasants often had their grain ground into flour at the lord's mill and baked their bread in communal ovens. Peasants also consumed vegetables and legumes grown in their gardens or common fields. Cabbage, turnips, onions, peas, and beans were commonly eaten. These were often stewed or boiled to make them more palatable. Meat was a luxury peasants rarely had access to. The majority of their protein came from dairy products like cheese and butter, which were derived from their own livestock, including cows, goats, and sheep. Peasants also hunted small game like rabbits or birds, or caught fish from nearby rivers or ponds when available. Fruit was generally scarce and considered a luxury. Peasants occasionally consumed apples, berries, or dried fruits, but it was rare. Peasants often faced malnutrition and deficiencies due to limited access to certain foods. Disease and hygiene. Disease and hygiene during the medieval era were significant challenges that affected all levels of society, but peasants perhaps the most. Medical knowledge and understanding of diseases were limited, and outbreaks of various illnesses had a profound impact on the population. Sanitation and hygiene practices were rudimentary, and the lack of proper sanitation systems contributed to the spread of diseases. Most cities and towns lacked adequate sewage systems, leading to the disposal of waste in open ditches or directly into bodies of water. Streets were often dirty and littered with waste and animal excrement, creating an unhygienic environment. Water sources were often contaminated, as people relied on wells, rivers, or communal water sources. These were often shared with animals, leading to further contamination. Access to clean and safe drinking water was a significant challenge, contributing to the spread of waterborne diseases. Bathing was infrequent, with some people bathing only a few times a year. The use of soap was not widespread, and people often relied on herbs or perfume to mask unpleasant odors. The crowded living conditions of cities and towns, coupled with poor hygiene practices, facilitated the rapid spread of infectious diseases. Outbreaks of diseases like the bubonic plague, aka Black Death, smallpox, typhus, and dysentery were devastating. Medical knowledge during the medieval era was based on a blend of superstition, religious beliefs, and traditional remedies. Physicians often relied on bloodletting, herbal remedies, and charms to treat illnesses with limited success. Working conditions. For peasants and laborers, life was characterized by hard physical labor in the fields. They worked long hours, often from dawn till dusk, to cultivate crops, tend to livestock, and maintain the land. The work was seasonal, with peak periods during planting and harvesting seasons. Peasants faced heavy physical exertion, enduring back-breaking tasks like plowing, sowing, reaping, and threshing. Working conditions were harsh and demanding. Peasants toiled in all weather conditions, enduring extreme heat, cold, rain, or snow. They lacked modern agricultural tools and relied on basic implements like wooden plows, sickles, or scythes. The work was physically demanding, and injuries from accidents or strain were common. Craftsmen and artisans like blacksmiths, carpenters, and weavers had more specialized occupations. They worked in small workshops or as part of guilds, honing their skills and producing goods for the local community. Craftsmen often worked long hours as well, creating intricate and high-quality products using traditional techniques and tools. Merchants and traders played a vital role in the medieval economy. They traveled long distances, often on foot or horseback, to buy and sell goods. Women and children. In peasant households, women played a vital role in agricultural labor alongside men. They worked in the fields, tending to crops, harvesting, and taking care of livestock. Women were responsible for household chores like cooking, cleaning, and managing the home. Their contributions were essential for the survival of the family and community. Marriage and family were central to the lives of women in medieval times. Arranged marriages were common, and women were expected to marry at a young age, often in their early teens. The primary purpose of marriage was to secure economic alliances, consolidate land, and ensure the continuity of the family lineage. Women's agency in choosing partners was limited, and their lives were primarily defined by their roles as wives and mothers. Children, especially boys, were expected to contribute to the family's labor from a young age. They assisted with farming tasks, herded animals, and learned essential skills for their future roles as adults. Education was limited, with literacy being a rare privilege for both boys and girls. The lives of women and children in medieval times were constrained by societal expectations and limited opportunities for social mobility. They were subject to the authority of their fathers or husbands, and their individual aspirations and desires often took a back seat to familial and societal obligations. Now it's time to hear from you. What do you think the hardest part of being a medieval peasant was? Do you think you could have survived? Let us know in the comments section below.